In 1819, Lake Champlain witnesses reported a monster called Champ. Just after sunrise on July 22, 1819, a working boat drifts on the dark water of Bowaga Bay near Port Henry, New York. The lake is calm enough to fool a man. No storm, no whitecaps, just that thin early light laying silver across the surface of Lake Champlain. Then the water ahead of Captain Crum begins to rise. Not splash, rise. At first it looks like a log rolling under the skin of the lake. Then the shape keeps coming up, and up, and up, until a black neck and a head like a seahorse rear more than 15 feet above the water. Crum stares at something he later swears is no fish, no drifting timber, no trick of the eye. He says it is monstrous. Long beyond reason. Dark as wet iron. He can make out a white star on its forehead, a red band around the neck, eyes the color of a peeled onion. Even now, 2 centuries later, that description feels bizarrely intimate, almost too intimate, which only makes it worse. Because if he is lying, why those details? And if he is telling the truth, what in God's name was lifting itself out of an American lake just 5 years after the War of 1812? The thing undulates once. The water folds around its body in heavy, glistening ridges. For a moment, the lake seems too small to hold it. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it sinks back into the bay, leaving Captain Crum alone with the ripples, the silence, and a story that should have died as dockside gossip. It doesn't. 2 days later, his account appears in a newspaper, and that should make the whole mystery simpler. It should make it solid, historical, recorded. Instead, it gets stranger, because the report carries a title linking it to the sea serpent frenzy at Cape Ann, and it is signed with a name so odd that some people still think the entire thing was a joke. Horse mackerel. So what happened on Lake Champlain in 1819? A hoax? A frontier prank? A bad misidentification? Or the first famous modern sighting of a creature the region would come to call Champ? And the deeper you go into this one, the less steady the water feels. Hey, welcome back. If you love historical mysteries told like stories, with the strange details left in and the easy answers left out, you're in exactly the right place. Before we go any deeper into the waters of Lake Champlain, take a second to like the video, and down in the comments tell me what country you're watching from. I always love seeing where these stories travel, and it genuinely helps build a little late-night mystery community here. It also tells the algorithm that this kind of carefully researched atmospheric history is worth showing to more people. We're working toward 100,000 subscribers, which still feels a little wild to say out loud. And every like, every comment, every subscription helps push the channel toward that milestone. So if you enjoy the best historical mystery and cryptid stories, the kind where legend and record blur together, stick around. I'm glad you're here. Now, let's go back to the lake. In 1819, Lake Champlain is not just scenery. It is a road, a border, a memory of war. Only a few years earlier, this long corridor of fresh water had been one of the most strategically important places in North America. Armies had moved through the Champlain Valley. Supplies had crossed its surface. Cannon smoke had rolled over these waters during the War of 1812. Men on both sides understood something very simple. Whoever controlled Lake Champlain controlled movement between New York, Vermont, and the route north toward Canada. By the summer of 1819, the fighting is over, but the lake has not lost its edge. It still carries cargo, rumor, timber, fish, and people trying to make a living in a rough borderland where wilderness and settlement sit shoulder to shoulder. The Champlain Canal has not opened yet. Trade is still awkward, costly, dependent on water and weather. So the lake matters. Every cove, every landing, every narrow reach matters. And Lake Champlain is enormous, much larger than people imagine if they have only seen it on a map. It stretches roughly 120 miles, reaches about 12 miles at its widest point, and in its deepest areas drops to around 400 feet. Cold water, changing weather, more than 500 miles of shoreline, marshes, rocky points, islands, fog banks, shallows, and long dark reaches where wind can arrive like an ambush. In winter it can freeze. In summer it can look as gentle as glass. That contrast is part of why these stories last. The lake has moods. So picture the region as Captain Crum knew it. Port Henry is still young, still rough around the edges, the kind of place where people notice who comes in by boat and who leaves by wagon. Bulwaga Bay lies nearby, quiet in appearance but oddly memorable in the history of the Champ legend. If you ask believers, this bay keeps coming up for a reason. If you ask skeptics, they'll tell you that sheltered water, drifting debris, low morning light, and imagination can do a great deal. Both sides, frankly, have a point. Captain Crum himself remains a shadowy figure, which is fitting for a story like this. We do not get a rich diary, a portrait, a long sworn affidavit with neat details about his childhood and habits. What we have is a name, a role, and an encounter. He is remembered as a lake man, somebody accustomed to boats and distance, and the ordinary behavior of water. That matters. If a farmer unfamiliar with the lake had made the claim, people might dismiss it more easily. But a captain? A man whose living depends on reading the surface? That complicates things. Now here's the thing. Legends never begin in empty places. Before Captain Crum, the indigenous peoples of the region, including the Abenaki and the Iroquois, had stories about powerful beings associated with these waters. In some retellings, the creature is described as a giant serpent, even horned in certain versions. The Abenaki name often given is Gittaskog. You have to be careful here, because folklore is fragile and later writers love to oversimplify it. But the important point is this. Long before newspapers, the lake already had a reputation. People did not need an 1819 headline to suspect that deep water might hold something old, dangerous, or sacred. That older layer of belief is important because it changes how we hear Crum's story. He is not reporting a monster into a cultural vacuum. He is adding another stone to a cairn that already exists. There is another wrinkle. Many people claim the French explorer Samuel de Champlain, the lake's namesake, saw Champ back in 1609. That version sounds perfect, doesn't it? A famous explorer, a primeval lake, the first European witness to the beast, except the history is muddier. Champlain did describe a strange fish told to him by indigenous guides, a creature with a long snout and dangerous teeth, but historians have long argued he was probably describing a gar or a similarly unfamiliar fish, not a full-blown lake monster. Still, the confusion helped the legend grow. Once a story gets attached to a famous name, it hardens. By the summer of 1819, the Champlain Valley is a place where practical men carry superstition the way they carry pocket knives. Quietly, without admitting it unless the hour is late. The morning of July 22 begins like countless others. The air is cool, but not bitter. The smell is a mix of damp wood, lake mud, and that fresh mineral scent water has before the sun fully warms it. Loons call in the distance. Maybe gulls circle farther out. The bay does what bays do in the early light, it holds its breath. Captain Crum is aboard a scow, a flat-bottomed working vessel, not some dramatic ship fit for a Gothic novel. That detail matters to me. Mysteries are always more unsettling when they happen in ordinary places to people doing ordinary jobs. He is not out there hunting monsters. He is working. Little does he know, before that day is done, his name will be passed from mouth to mouth, from tavern to tavern, and eventually from newspaper page to regional folklore. And there is one more detail to keep in mind, because it becomes important later. According to the printed account, Crum does not just report size, he reports markings. The white star, the red belt, the onion-colored eyes. Those are not the kinds of flourishes people usually invent on the fly when they are frightened. Or maybe they are exactly the kinds of flourishes someone invents when telling a tale after 2 drinks. That tension sits at the heart of the whole mystery. So the stage is set. A veteran lake corridor, only recently removed from war. A captain on calm water. Older serpent traditions haunting the region like half-remembered dreams. And beneath it all, a lake deep enough in places to hide cold currents, giant fish, and any number of mistakes. If only they had realized how long that morning would echo. At first, Crum notices motion where there should be none. Not fast motion. Not the dart of a fish or the slap of a beaver tail. Something broader. He sees a disturbance at a distance of roughly 200 yards, far enough to make certainty difficult, close enough to make denial impossible. The surface bulges in a long black line, as though an oar the size of a church steeple were being drawn just beneath the water. He narrows his eyes. Maybe it is a floating tree trunk. The lake is full of debris after storms. Maybe a cluster of logs caught in current. Maybe, if the light is playing tricks, several things at once blending into one shape. A practical man thinks that way first. Monster comes later. Then the head rises. And suddenly practicality is gone. The newspaper account says the creature reared more than 15 feet from the water. Imagine what that means. Not a quick splash. Not a hump. A vertical emergence. A black neck lifting into the morning air. Water pouring off it in sheets. The kind of sight that makes your mind reject what your eyes are sending. We talk a lot about fear in these stories, but the first feeling may have been disbelief, not terror. Refusal. No, that cannot be there. The head, Crum says, resembles a seahorse. Strange comparison. Not horse, not snake. Seahorse. Something curled, unusual, almost ornamental in silhouette. He claims it has 3 teeth, 2 centered and 1 in the upper jaw. That detail is so oddly specific it has haunted retellings ever since. He says the creature is black. He says there is a white star on its forehead. He says a red band circles its neck. He says the eyes are large and pale, like a peeled onion. And the body is said to be about 187 feet long. Now even believers pause at that number. 187 feet is absurd. It is longer than many modern blue whales. It is longer than the American warship Saratoga built on Lake Champlain during the war. If Crum truly said that, then either his estimate exploded under pressure, or he saw something so impossible that the human brain reached for scale and failed. Skeptics seize on that number, and frankly I understand why. But massive exaggeration does not automatically erase the possibility that he saw something real and misjudged its size. People do this constantly on open water. Distance stretches perception. Waves create false segmentation. One object becomes many. Many become one. Still, 187 feet. That number crashes into the story like a cannonball. For a few seconds, maybe longer, the creature moves across the water. Some later versions mention hunches along its back as large as barrels, rising one after another. That image is grotesque in the best possible way. Not one smooth body, but a chain of living humps. Wet. Black. Rolling. The kind of thing that would make the lake look diseased. You can almost hear the silence around Crum. No cheerful shouting. No creak of conversation. Just the soft knock of the scow. The hush of water against wood, maybe the involuntary sound a man makes when he is alone with something he cannot place. Maybe he mutters a prayer, maybe a curse, maybe nothing at all. Because what do you say? If there are others within hail, what would they see? A man frozen on a working boat, staring hard at empty seeming water. And then maybe they see it too. A head. A neck. A black line sinking. Reappearing, folding the surface behind it. The story later spreads as a witnessed event, not merely a dream or nightmare. And that matters. Even when only one named witness survives in print, legends this durable tend to feed on surrounding affirmation. By what we can reconstruct, the encounter is brief. That, too, feels authentic. Real shocking events are often terribly short. The creature does not circle the boat for 20 minutes and pose for sketches. It appears. It imprints itself on the mind. Then it is gone. Gone where? Into Bulwaga Bay. Into deeper water. Into reeds and shadow. Into history. And now comes the human part. The part I always find just as interesting as the beast itself. Captain Crum has to decide what to do next. Does he tell anyone immediately? Does he hold it in for an hour, hoping the ordinary world will return and make him feel foolish for ever considering it? Does he rehearse the account in his head before speaking? Because the moment he opens his mouth, the story changes his life. He becomes the man who saw the monster. By mid-morning, the lake has resumed its innocent face. That is one of the cruel things about water. It keeps no expression. Crum can point to the spot, but the spot looks like every other patch of lake. The ripples are already flattening. The sun climbs. Work continues. Maybe that makes him angrier. Maybe it makes him doubt himself. Did he really see a white star? Was the neck truly red-banded? Was the body one animal or a string of illusions linked together by fear? But when he tells it with conviction. Word moves quickly in small communities, especially when the story is impossible. Port Henry and the neighboring settlements do what such places have always done. They repeat it, sharpen it, test it against their own instincts. One man says it was a sturgeon, and a big one at that. Another says no sturgeon stands 15 feet out of the water. Someone else laughs and asks whether the captain had breakfast with his cider. Meanwhile, another listener goes quiet, because an uncle once told him never to mock what lives in Champlain after dark. Remember this detail, because it becomes important later. The people who hear the story do not all react the same way. That divide begins immediately. Belief and ridicule are born together. And then, 2 days later, on July 24th, 1819, the story enters print. The Plattsburgh Republican publishes an account under the title Cape Ann Serpent on Lake Champlain, linking the sighting to the wave of sea serpent excitement already stirring New England. That alone changes the temperature. Once a local mystery plugs into a larger craze, the danger of embellishment goes way up. And then there is that signature at the end, horse mackerel. If you're still watching, drop an emoji in the comments, because this is where the case starts slipping through your fingers. Horse mackerel. Was that a pseudonym used by a journalist having fun? A local wag? Someone protecting Crum's dignity? Or was it a wink to readers that the whole report should not be taken at face value? Skeptics love this detail, and honestly, they should. It is suspicious. It sounds playful in exactly the wrong way. If you were trying to undermine the credibility of a monster report without killing its entertainment value, that is exactly the kind of signature you might use. But here's where it gets strange. Even if the newspaper writer was having some fun, that does not prove there was no underlying sighting. Newspapers in the early 19th century were rowdy places. Editors borrowed, embellished, jabbed, mocked, and dramatized. Fact and flourish were not kept at the same sterile distance many modern readers expect. A bizarre signature could mean total invention. It could also mean a real report dressed up for hungry readers. So, the publication clarifies nothing. It only preserves the mystery. And once a story is preserved, it can grow. In taverns and on docks, people begin comparing what they know of the lake. They speak of large fish, of currents, of drifting roots, of shadows at dusk. Old stories resurface. Abenaki warnings, serpents, things better left undisturbed. Others push back hard. Men who work these waters through war and trade do not want their lake turned into a nursery tale. The arguments become part of the legend. They always do. Meanwhile, the memory of the encounter hardens inside Crum's mind. That is another subtle terror in cases like this. Whether he saw a beast or misread the world for one violent moment, he has been changed. Once you have seen something you cannot explain, every ordinary ripple becomes a test. Every dark shape on the lake asks the same question again. Did I really see it? And Lake Champlain, patient as ever, offers no answer. The years pass. Then the decades. Most frontier marvels fade. This one does not. Part of that is because Lake Champlain keeps producing stories. By the 1870s, America is changing fast. Railroads bite through terrain. Steam power reshapes travel. Newspapers multiply. Showmen like P.T. Barnum understand better than anyone that the public will pay for wonder, especially if it comes with just enough doubt to keep argument alive. And Champ, or whatever swims behind the legend, returns at exactly the right moment. In 1873, reports around the lake surge again. A railroad crew, according to newspapers, sees the head of an enormous serpent in the water, its bright silvery scales glistening in the sun. That glint matters. It is different from Crum's black monster, and yet eerily compatible with older descriptions of strange fish in these waters. Is the creature changing? Or are the witnesses seeing different animals and forcing them into one legend? Then comes another account linked to Clinton County Sheriff Nathan H. Mooney, who reports seeing an enormous snake or water serpent, somewhere in the range of 25 to 35 feet long in some versions. Notice the scale shift. Not 187 feet now, something still huge, but at least biologically imaginable. That discrepancy does not settle the case. It deepens it. Maybe Crum exaggerated wildly. Maybe Mooney underestimated. Maybe both men saw different things. Or maybe the legend is attracting every odd sighting on the lake and magnetizing them into a single identity. Now imagine the conversations this creates. One camp says, "There, you see? The later witnesses describe something smaller and more realistic. Crum's report was distorted, but the core was true. The other camp says the exact opposite. They say changing size means unstable testimony. Unstable testimony means myth, and myth means people are seeing what they expect to see. Both camps keep the monster alive. That summer, the atmosphere around Lake Champlain begins to feel charged. Sightings are not yet daily, but they are frequent enough to create a low electric hum in the public mind. Fishermen look longer at the water before casting. Passengers on steamers angle toward railings. Boys scan coves hoping to become famous. Adults pretend not to care, while staring just as hard. And then comes one of the most dramatic claims of all, the steamship WB. Eddie is said to have encountered Champ by running into it. Think about how frightening that would feel on open water. A vessel heavy with tourists or passengers moving across the lake, engines or paddles working. Everyone settled into that false sense of mechanical security people get on boats. Then, a jolt. A shudder up through the hull, voices rising. The sickening tilt that makes every person aboard suddenly remember how much water is beneath them. Accounts say the ship nearly turned over. Now, whether that happened exactly as remembered is another matter. Memory is theatrical. Newspapers even more so. But you can see why this incident becomes central to the legend. Captain Crum saw something from a distance. The WB Eddie, if the report is trusted, struck it. That moves the story from sighting to contact. Wait until you hear what happened next. Because the moment the legend stops being a curiosity and starts sounding like a navigational hazard, it becomes something bigger than folklore. It becomes a challenge. People want proof. Not just stories. Not just gossip. Proof. Some want proof because they believe. Others want proof because they are desperate to kill the tale once and for all. Barnum, never one to miss an opportunity, reportedly offers a reward for the hide of the great Champlain serpent in 1873. Later, another bounty is floated in the 1880s. The amounts are enormous by the standards of the day. And what does that tell you? Not that Barnum believed necessarily. Barnum built empires out of spectacle, but he understood the public mood perfectly. Champ had crossed from local oddity into national curiosity. Searches are discussed, guns are mentioned, capture schemes are imagined. Men who would laugh at superstition and daylight find themselves outlining monster hunts after sunset. That, to me, is one of the purest signs of a powerful legend. It recruits even its enemies. At the same time, rational explanations multiply. Sturgeon, say some. Lake sturgeon are large, armored-looking, ancient in appearance, and can absolutely frighten someone who sees one under strange conditions. Others mention gar, though long-nosed gar are not the giant dinosaurs popular imagination wants them to be. Logs are a favorite answer. So are otters swimming in line, waves bunching under odd light, and what later scientists would describe as superior mirages, visual distortions produced when layers of air and water temperatures bend the image of distant objects into something elongated and monstrous. Those explanations make sense. The problem is that none of them fully satisfy the people who think they saw a neck where there should have been no neck. Disagreements within communities around the lake become almost tribal. Families pass stories down differently. One grandfather says nonsense, all of it. Another says your aunt's cousin saw humps out by the point and came home white as linen. Men on one dock mock the believers. Men on the next dock quietly admit they do not like crossing certain water at dawn. You can almost map personality types onto the shoreline. And Lake Champlain keeps feeding the argument because it is a master of ambiguity. A 120-mile lake bordered by 2 states and reaching into Quebec can hide 1,000 mistakes. Shadows stretch, storm fronts race down long corridors of water. Cold, deep areas neighbor shallow bays. Wind can turn the lake hard and black in minutes. Then there are the sounds. The slap under docks, the groan of boats, the sudden heave of fish, reeds scraping in the dark. In a place like that, reason never quite gets full control. By the early 20th century, the legend should have faded under modern scrutiny. Instead, it becomes part of local identity. That is an unexpected twist, and it matters. Champ is no longer just a threat lurking in deep water. It is also a symbol, a story people tell visitors, a regional ghost with a tourism smile. But that domestication does not erase the unease. It only masks it. Sometimes communities turn fear into mascot because it is easier than turning it into certainty. Then, in 1945, passengers on the SS Ticonderoga report seeing a creature. Again, a group sighting. Again, enough people at once to prevent easy dismissal as one person's imagination. And here's the pattern you start noticing if you spend too much time with Champ, as I admittedly have. The reports survive changes in technology. Sail era, steam era, automobile era, camera era, television era. If this were only one frontier prank, why does it keep resurfacing in new forms? Of course, skeptics answer that question instantly. Because once a legend takes root, people reinterpret every anomaly through it. A lake without a monster has strange things in it. A lake with a monster has evidence. That is a good skeptical point. A strong one. But the believers have a strong point too. Why Lake Champlain? Why this lake? Again and again, across 200 years, with witnesses ranging from working men to tourists to law officers to ferry passengers? Why do the stories keep clustering around real geography, especially places like Bulwaga Bay? By now, the legend has become self-reinforcing. Every new sighting renews the old ones. Every old report gives the new ones a template. In other words, the monster is evolving in two places at once, on the water and in the human mind. And then photography arrives, dragging the mystery into the modern world where images are supposed to settle arguments. They don't. In 1977, Sandra Mancy takes what becomes the most famous image associated with Champ, a photograph showing what looks like a dark neck or hump rising from the lake. For believers, it is the long-awaited visual breakthrough. For skeptics, it is another ambiguous object, possibly a log, maybe a submerged tree trunk, maybe something far more ordinary shaped by angle and expectation. Analysts later point out missing negatives, uncertain location details, and the awkward fact that the area where the photo was supposedly taken was relatively shallow. Those objections are serious. Still, the image endures because it looks just close enough to a monster to keep hope alive. Then in 2005, fisherman Dick Falter and his stepson Pete Baudette capture video that some say shows a plesiosaur-like creature. Others see fish, eel, wake, distortion. Same pattern. Same unresolved split. So instead of technology killing the legend, technology embalms it. Every generation gets its own artifact and its own argument. That may be the strangest escalation of all. Now let's go back to the water itself, because every good mystery eventually does. The most intense part of the legend is not Captain Crum's first look. It is the moment these stories suggest the thing in the lake is not merely seen, but physically present in the path of human movement. That is where folklore becomes danger. So picture one of those later 19th century crossings on Lake Champlain. The day is bright enough for confidence. Maybe too bright. A vessel like the W.B. Eddy moves through the water with the complacent rhythm passengers trust. Conversation rolls easily. Ladies adjust hats against the breeze. Men lean at the rail and talk politics, crops, railway stock, maybe the persistent nonsense about the lake serpent. Some laugh. Some glance toward the water anyway. Because even ridicule needs an audience. Then comes the impact. Not a crash in the cinematic sense. Something worse. A blunt, unnatural resistance under the hull. The kind of jarring thud that travels through deck planks into ankles and spine. The vessel shivers. Loose items jump. Voices break. Somebody grabs the rail. Somebody else yells that they've struck a snag. But there should be no snag here. Another passenger looks over the side and sees water churning in a violent oval. Not the clean churn of the boat's own passage, but something muscular, convulsive, alive. The deck tilts enough to empty laughter from the air. A second later, maybe three, a dark mass rolls just beneath the surface off the beam of the ship. Humps. Or waves. Or the back of something too large to fit the mind. The lake foams along its length. For one impossible instant, a head seems to break free of the water, then vanish again. Did everyone see that? Or did panic spread one person's sight into 20 memories at once? This is the problem with collective fear. It can reveal. It can also infect. Still, imagine being there. Machinery around you, people around you, and yet every reassuring invention of the modern age suddenly feels fragile because something beneath the vessel may be stronger than wood, stronger than steam, stronger than your certainty about what belongs in freshwater. Orders are shouted. Balance the load. Steady yourselves. Keep calm. Calm, of course, is the first casualty. A mother clutches a child away from the rail. A gentleman who mocked the serpent story minutes ago now stares hard into the water, jaw clenched. Crewmen argue whether to slow or press through. If the thing is a snag, you risk the hull. If it is an animal, what kind of animal stays under a moving vessel and rises with it? If it is nothing but crossed wakes and imagination, why does the deck still feel haunted by that jolt? The immediate danger resolves, at least in the stories, because the ship does not overturn. It lurches. It survives. The lake once again gives up no body, no carcass, no clean evidence. Passengers are left with adrenaline, contradiction, and the ugly knowledge that they may have just touched the mystery. That is the climax hidden inside the long history of Champ. Not merely that someone saw a monster, but that people on one of the great 19th century machines of progress thought, if only for a minute, that something older and wilder had risen under them and reminded them whose world this really is. Can you imagine being in their position? Comment below. And yet, even after all that, the legend does not end with a body floating to shore or a triumphant scientific paper. It dissolves again into testimony, into newspaper ink, into retellings by people who swear the deck moved under their feet in a way timber and current do not explain. The same cycle follows every major Champ event. Sighting, shock, discussion, investigation, doubt, survival of the story. What happened to the witnesses? Mostly, they did what witnesses in unresolved mysteries always do. They carried the account into ordinary life and let others sort them into believers, fools, attention seekers, or unlucky people who happen to glimpse something rare. Captain Crum becomes a foundational name. Mooney becomes another. Steamer passengers become a crowd memory. Sandra Mancy becomes tied to an image almost everyone has seen, though no one can fully settle. A Falter and Baudet add video to the file. None of them closes the case. Official investigations in the modern sense are limited because there is rarely anything concrete to investigate beyond testimony and media. What we do get are waves of skeptical analysis. Researchers point to the size problems in Crum's report, especially that incredible 187-foot estimate. They note that the 1819 newspaper piece may have been influenced by the sea serpent craze around Cape Ann, and may even have been satirical, given the horse mackerel signature. That is a real strike against the story's reliability. You cannot ignore it. Other experts look at the lake itself. Large fish can produce startling impressions. Lake sturgeon in particular have the kind of prehistoric silhouette that can briefly transform into legend under the wrong light. Superior mirages can stretch mundane objects into bizarre forms. Swimming deer, dogs, otters in sequence, floating timber, wave trains, wakes crossing each other, all of these can create something uncanny. And because Lake Champlain is so large and visually changeable, it is a perfect stage for misidentification. But here's what skeptics cannot quite erase: repetition. Over 300 alleged sightings have been reported over time. That does not mean 300 monster encounters. It means 300 moments when human beings looked at Lake Champlain and felt ordinary explanation slipping. That volume is culturally significant whether the creature exists or not. It tells us the lake has functioned for generations as a theater of uncertainty. And local people have embraced that uncertainty in a fascinating way. Port Henry declared its waters a safe haven for Champ in 1981. Vermont followed with a symbolic protective resolution in 1982. New York did likewise in 1983. Think about that. An alleged monster with no verified specimen receives symbolic legal protection. That is either wonderfully charming or deeply telling. Maybe both. It says the region no longer needs final proof to value the story. Champ has become part of the lake's identity, like fog, stone, and winter wind. I see we have viewers from the United States, Canada, the UK, and Australia all the time on this channel, so welcome if that's you. And I'm curious, do you have similar legends where you're from? Because Champ belongs to a much wider family of water mysteries. Nessie in Scotland, Ogopogo in British Columbia, serpents in Scandinavian folklore, river monsters in South America. This story might especially remind Canadian viewers, since Champlain itself reaches toward Quebec, and the legend never really respected the border. The cultural significance runs deeper than tourism. though tourism absolutely plays a role. Champ appears on signs, statues, souvenirs, sports branding. The Vermont Lake Monster's baseball identity kept the creature alive for a whole new generation. Children search for it from ferries. Adults smile and pretend it is all in fun. And then sometimes, out on the water when the light goes wrong and the lake gets that slate-black look, the smile fades a little. That is when folklore stops feeling cute. So where does that leave us? We have an 1819 sighting by Captain Crum near Bulwaga Bay, dramatic enough to survive in print and strange enough to invite immediate skepticism. We have a 19th century cluster of reports that widen the legend rather than clarifying it. We have steamship encounters, railroad crew sightings, sheriff testimony, mid-20th century group reports, a famous photo in 1977, disputed video in 2005, and hundreds of smaller moments scattered around a lake large enough to support both mystery and mistake. We also have contradictions everywhere. Crum's creature is impossibly long. Other witnesses describe something much shorter. Some accounts emphasize black skin, others silver scales. Some see humps, others a neck, others a serpent. Either Champ is a master of variation, or the legend is a basket into which many unrelated anomalies have been tossed. And that brings us to the theories. The first is the skeptical one, and it has real weight. The 1819 report may have been exaggerated or even partially satirical from the start. The horse mackerel signature is a red flag. The sea serpent craze of the era created fertile ground for copycat stories. Later sightings could easily be misidentified sturgeon, logs, wave effects, mirages, or memory contamination. In this version, Champ is not one creature. Champ is a cultural habit, a name people give to the moment water becomes hard to read. The second theory is scientific but more generous to the witnesses. Maybe there is no monster in the storybook sense, yet many people genuinely saw unusual but natural animals. Very large sturgeon, rarely seen fish, groups of animals moving in sequence, distorted views caused by atmosphere and angle. If that is the answer, then Champ is not a hoax exactly. It is a recurring collision between human perception and a difficult lake. A real phenomenon, just not a prehistoric beast. Then there is the theory people most want to believe when the night is late and the lake is quiet. That Lake Champlain, deep and ancient and cold, has hidden something unknown. Not necessarily a plesiosaur swimming unchanged from prehistory. Honestly, that part always feels more like wishful poster art than biology. But could an undocumented large animal, or a vanishingly rare survivor population of something strange, account for at least a handful of these reports? Mainstream science says no. Folklore never stopped saying maybe. And maybe that is why Champ endures. Not because the evidence is perfect. It isn't. Not because the witnesses are all airtight. They aren't. But because the story lives in that maddening space between dismissal and conviction. Too weird to trust completely. Too persistent to shrug off completely. Back on that July morning in 1819, Captain Crum looks across Bulwaga Bay and sees something lift out of the water that should not be there. 2 centuries later, we are still leaning over the same water, asking the same question he must have asked himself when the ripples finally settled. What did I just see? So now I want your theory. Was Champ a hoax amplified by a rowdy newspaper culture? A chain of honest mistakes on a very deceptive lake? Or is there, or was there, something living in Lake Champlain that slipped through the edges of the record and left us only frightened descriptions and a wake? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, you'll love the next story. Because we're staying in the world of historical mysteries, where witness testimony, folklore, and real geography tangle together in all the most unsettling ways. Thanks for watching, stay curious, and if you ever find yourself on Lake Champlain at dawn, with the water perfectly still and the bay looking harmless, maybe don't stare too long.